Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I hope that you all are now ready to attend the class. As you know, among the various steps of research methodology we discussed earlier, there are 6 steps. Out of that, we have already studied formulating and clarifying research topic, the first one, where we discussed how to generate a research idea and refine it, and then also write research question and research objective. The next one we addressed is literature review, where we discussed why do you need to do a literature review. Then we discussed about sources of literature, strategy to search literature, and finally writing review report. Today we'll be dealing with the third research process, that is research design. When you build a house on your own, or suppose you visit to a builder to see upcoming housing project, the builder will show you a drawing of the whole project, that is called naksha. From where you can visualize how will be the apartment when it is finally ready for possession. Similarly, when you build a house of your own, first you have to make a naksha or drawing. That way, if you start making a naksha, then construction, then there is no chance you commit any mistake during the construction time. Otherwise, without a drawing or a naksha, if you start building, then maybe in the middle you realize, okay, I should have our toilet in this side. Then my entrance door should have been facing north or south. So many things will come. Similarly, in research, the overall strategy that you choose to integrate different components of the study in a coherent and logical way, thereby ensuring you will efficiently address the research problem, is called research design. Basically, it constitutes the blueprint of the collection, measurement, and analysis of data. No, this is what is called the research design. Once you have done a research design, then you are sure that there will not be any problem throughout your carrying out your research objectives, because all you have planned, how you will collect the data, how you will do the analysis, everything you have planned. So if you are following this research design, then there will not be, you will not facing any problem while carrying out your research. So this is a very important aspect of research methodology. The perception about it's a very important the basic principle of research design depends on research philosophy. This is a research philosophy. We will discuss this little more in detail, but it's a very important aspect. There are a well thought out set of consistent assumptions which underpin your research design. These are basically well thought out set of assumptions. They underpin your research design. That is called research philosophy. In a simple way, you can think of the perception about the reality and knowledge. What is your perception about the reality and knowledge? That will decide your research philosophy. In research philosophy, to understand more clearly, we'll discuss few terminology. One of them is it is used in the research philosophy is called ontology. Ontology means what is reality? What is reality? What makes something real? These are the question. What makes whatever, something real? You ask question. What do you mean by reality? So there are two extreme school of thought on this ontology. So one is there is only one reality. Or there is only one truth. There is other extreme, more than one. More than one reality. It depends on perceiver. And also there are another school of thought which is in between. I can just for food for thought, I can tell you what is the reality when you do double slit experiment. Sometimes you say subatomic particles, they are waves. Sometimes you say they are particles. Then what is the true reality? Sometimes there are some optical illusion images. Same image, it will show to somebody. Then some people may say this is there is a picture I forgot to be, that is a rabbit, or in other angle it will look like a duck. But suppose I show you somebody's picture of one person standing. That is a reality. You see, or I see, or anybody looks that picture, he will tell it is reality. That is only one objectivity to that. But in certain cases, that is true. You have multiple reality. It all depends on the perceiver who is observing it. This is ontology is one of the philosophical concept. It has two different extremes. One is there is only one reality. As you go along, we will learn that in science, suppose in science we will follow this one. The ontology is only one reality. That truth is one. Anybody observes it, anybody does the experiment, the result will be same. But normally when you go to social studies, here you will see multiple reality. It all depends the perception of the person, how he interprets the observation. So similarly, we have also philosophical terminology that is called, wait a minute, that is called epistemology. Epistemology. This means how you know what you know. So this has also, two type of belief. Only I'm giving the extreme belief. There are also middle path, what is called real, let me write down, I'll tell you. This one school of thought is knowledge can be measured by reliable tool. The other extreme says it can only be interpreted, not measured. Okay. One extreme says, okay, knowledge can be measured. I can measure it. In other case, it cannot be measured, can be only interpreted. Knowledge can only be interpreted. So in research field, we have both these two type of philosophical approach is adopted. Like we have what is called ontological approach. Let me write. It is called objective objectivism, or this means there is one total accurate description for any reality. There is only one accurate description or explanation. There is objective reality out there, and we can go and find through experiments. That is what is same as you have only one reality. And other case you call it subjectivism. In this case, the world, it is believed that the world is not separable from our thoughts. There are multiple realities, and it depends on viewpoint of the observer. Similarly, if you look philosophical approach of epistemology, that means how we learn what we learn. Something called positivism, objective, and other school of thought is interpretive, or subjectivism. In case of positivism, it is possible to observe the world in a value neutral way. That means if I do an experiment, it will be independent of the person who is doing it, which place you are doing, your result will be same. And our measurement is not going to uh, disturb any act of observation. That is what is positivism and objectivism. Whereas in case of interpretivism, our observation of the world are influenced by our conceptual baggages. Suppose I am studying some social science behavior of the people. So the person, it all depends on background of the person, because suppose in one religion, certain thing is considered to be good, but in some other religion, the same thing is considered to be bad. So it all that depends on the observer, how he will be interpreting the subject. So it's a interpretivity. So usually when we are using, when you are using scientific reasoning, two different approaches are followed. In terms of philosophy, what I told you, both the philosophical stance are correct. But as far as research is concerned, the key, however, is to be consistent with the method you apply. Suppose you want to be in the positivism, and that is also called quantitative, and then you remain there throughout your research work. If you are interpretivism, then you be there. That is the key. Otherwise, both the philosophy is correct, and in between also there is something called realism. Like I gave you the example, double slit experiment. It can be also, subatomic particle can behave like a wave and also like a particle. So that's a multiple reality that you have to accept it. When using scientific reasoning, two different approaches are followed. One is called uh, deductive reasoning. In this case, you start with theory. Then you go to hypothesis. Then you go for observation and then confirmation. This reasoning is also called positivism. Philosophy. The other one is inductive. That is, you start with an observation, then you go to pattern, then from pattern to hypothesis, from hypothesis to theory. These are the two scientific reasonings are usually applied. So important thing is this also known as interpretivism. Philosophy. It's important that whether your research is inductive or deductive, that you should know. And once you know whether it is inductive or deductive, uh, your research design will depend on how you perceive the reality. Now at this stage, I must tell you that now the research design will depend on how you perceive the reality. Most of the cases, when you do our experimental research, they are basically positivism and quantitative experimental research. But particularly in case of social studies, that falls in the category of interpretatism and qualitative research. But there are few concepts we'll just go through before we go any further. Some important concept relating to research design. Something called dependent variable and independent variable. This you may be knowing, but I will just elaborate. Dependent and independent variables. The concept which can take on different values is called a variable. Variable is just a concept which takes different values is called variables. Like you have also continuous variable and discrete variable. Suppose I say height, weight, income. These are continuous variables. Discrete variable, suppose I say number of children in the class, that is discrete variable. Now, if one variable depends upon or is a consequence of the other variable, it is termed as the dependent variable. Normally, we write y is the dependent variable and x is the independent variable. Any equation y is equal to, suppose I write equation y is equal to mx plus c. So this will be always independent variable, and this will be dependent variable. So you must know what is independent variable and dependent variable, because here y is depending on x through certain relationship. So you call y is a dependent variable and x is an independent variable. Okay. There is another concept that is called the extraneous variables. Independent variables that are not related to the purpose of the study. That means, suppose you have another independent variable other than x. Suppose y is your dependent variable and x is independent. Other than x, if there is another variable which may be affecting your dependent variable like y, they are termed as extraneous variable. That means independent variables that are not related to the purpose of the study but may affect dependent variable. They are called extraneous variables. That means in the equation I wrote y is equal to mx plus c. Other than x, suppose there are some other independent variable which can on which this value of y can depend. That is called extraneous variable. There is something called also control variable. Uh, One important characteristic of a good research design is to minimize the influence or effect of extraneous variable. The term control is used when you design the study to minimize the effect of extraneous variable. We say, when you do experiment in a controlled condition, most of the experiment we do in the laboratory, we say it is done in a controlled condition. That means when we are studying, relationship between two variables, we have made all other, influence of all other variable we have minimized. That is what is called the control variable. Then something called confounded relationship. But it means when a dependent variable is not free, you always wanted to minimize the effect of extraneous variable. But suppose the dependent variable is not free from influence of the extraneous variable, then when you get a relationship between the dependent and independent variable is confounded with extraneous variable, then you say that in that case it is confounded with extraneous variable. Okay, so let me write this. We will define few more before you. Research hypothesis. What is called research hypothesis? When a prediction or hypothesized relationship is to be tested by scientific method, it is termed as research hypothesis. Suppose you develop you predicted a hypothesized relationship between A and B. When you test that in a scientific method, how A is depending on B, this is termed as the research hypothesis. The research hypothesis must contain one, this is important, the research hypothesis must contain one dependent and one independent variable. Then there is another concept, what is called experimental and non-experimental hypothesis. Testing research. What is this? When research in which the independent variable is manipulated is termed as experimental hypothesis testing research. Most of our experiments, what do? You vary one parameter, one independent, go on varying one independent parameter, and then study how the dependent variable is changing. So when in a research in which the independent variable is manipulated is termed as experimental hypothesis testing research. When your independent variable is not manipulated, then it is called non-experimental hypothesis testing research. Suppose you want to you take a group of student 50 student in a class, and you want to study the relationship between their intelligence and reading habit. By some scale, you grade them as in terms of intelligence to all. You divide the you then find out what is the intelligence level of the student, and then reading ability. But in another case, you split the class into 25 and 25, and then you give coaching to 25, and then study the relationship. After those who are trained, how their reading abilities depending. So in that case, it is a experimental hypothesis testing. When you take two groups, 25 and 25 each, and one group you don't give any extra coaching, and other group you give extra coaching. Then you are enhancing, changing one of these intelligence as the intelligence parameter, which is in this case is the independent parameter. You are manipulating that. That is experimental research, experimental hypothesis testing research. But suppose you just want to in a class, you don't manipulate any parameter, just want to study the correlation between intelligence and reading ability, then it's a non experimental hypothesis testing research. Okay. Then few more terms you will see. Yeah, experiment, how to define experiment. Let me also do that for you. Experiment, what is experiment? You may be knowing all, but still I will, for completeness, I will also define for you the process of examining the truth of a statistical hypothesis relating to some research problem is known as an experiment. Let's write the process of examining the truth of a hypothesis relating to some search problem experiment. For example, experiment to examine the usefulness of a certain newly developed drug. And it can be also absolute, and also experiment can be also comparative. Suppose you want to study, fertilizer in the yield of the crops. So then you compare with two different fertilizer, and then do the experiment. So your experiment can be absolute and also comparative. So now we'll come to various research designs. Different research designs. In general, it can be categorized. There are three type of research. One is what is called exploratory research studies. Then second, descriptive. And diagnostic research studies. And third, testing research. So you have three type of research studies. So what is exploratory research studies? As the name suggests, it's basically a formulative research studies. The main purpose of such study is that of formulating a problem for more precise investigation of the or of developing the working hypothesis from an operational point of view. What is happening? Suppose you want to enter to a new field. So then the best thing is to, and you have certain idea to do an experiment. The best thing is to do one exploratory experiment. There are certain important aspects when you do a exploratory, because you exactly not much idea to how your research design will be, because how will be your data collection, how your data will come, and how the analysis will be done. So in such cases, this design is called exploratory. Here the major emphasis is on discovery of ideas, whether you can get some new idea by doing this exploratory research study. So main emphasis is on discovery of ideas and insights into the problem. The research designs for this type of study, it has to be flexible. So flexible enough to provide opportunity for considering different aspects of the problem. Suppose you initially when start doing the experiment, you found something is interesting happening. So your design should be such, it should be flexible, so that you can adapt. Suppose you want to study, some other aspect, while doing your experiment, so that you found that something more interesting is happening. Let me also explore that. So the research problem, broadly defined initially in this exploratory study, then it gets transformed into with a more precise meaning in the exploratory studies. When you start this exploratory research study, initially you may not be very clear, very precise what exactly you want to do. But once you do this, then you get the idea, and you may get some better insight into the whole process, research process, and you can get some idea, and you can develop some new hypothesis. And and it is this type of experiments are very flexible in design, so that as and when required, you can change. So this is what is called the exploratory research studies. Then descriptive and diagnostic research studies. This is basically applicable to most of the social research comes under this category. In descriptive and diagnostic studies, the research design must be rigid, because here your research design has to be very rigid and well defined from the beginning, and it's not flexible. And most you must pay attention to some of the points what will be discussed now. So let me see. First you have to formulate your objective very precisely. Formulate your objective very precisely, that what study is about and why it is being done. Specific objective is sufficient precision to ensure data collected are not, you have to be very sure that the precision you want, it is well defined, and all the data you have collected, they will be relevant. That's important. Then formulating your objective is one of the aspects you have to see. Then D, and you must design the method of your data collection. What technique of gathering data will be adopted, whether it is observation, questionnaire, interviewing, or examination of records. So, like, design the method of data collection. So, okay, let me erase this. And then some other aspect you have to consider is sample selection, because social studies you have to do interviews, and questionnaires you have to prepare. Then how you will do your sample selection, that is very important, so that normally you have to do what is called a random sampling, and you have to well in advance define how much sample you will collect, so that bias will be eliminated. Sample selection. Then D is collecting data. Where can the required data be found? You have to make sure who will be your respondent, to whom you will be taking your interview, or whom you are giving your questionnaire. They should be well defined, and you should do in a very long period of time, so that you safeguard against bias, and you must also ensure that your data, what you are getting, it is reliable. Reliability must be ensured. That's very important. And then collecting data, you have to consider processing and analyzing the data. You have to make appropriate tables and probability and sampling analysis. All you have to do. Probability and sampling analysis. And finally, you have to write the report. Report writing. The layout of the report needs to be well planned so that all things related to the research study may be well presented in the simple and effective style. So these are the things you have to do. Then when it comes to research design in case of a hypothesis testing, research design in case of this is important. This is basically the hypothesis testing research studies, generally known as experimental studies. These are experimental studies, where the researcher tests the hypothesis of causal relationship between variables. So earlier we saw any hypothesis has got one independent and one dependent variable. So in a hypothesis testing research, you have to study the causal relationship between variables. The research design in such studies, we often mean design of the experiment, because as you say, hypothesis testing, research design is basically experimental studies. So it is also sometimes called design of the experiment. So what is experimental research? What of course the main purpose of experimental research is to establish evidence-based relationship between variables that we have discussed many times, and cause and effect. Deliberate manipulation of one of the variable or more while trying to keep all other variable constant. That's what is the experiment thing. And experiment research are very it is good because it can be replicated. Your experiment, what you have done, that anybody can do, and we should get the same result. That makes us more confident. Experimental research are the final say. There may be 10 number of theories. They may predict 10 different things, but one experiment will finally make 9 of them out. Only one of them will be correct. And in case of experimental research, data can be analyzed using inferential statistical test. This inferential statistical test will in coming lectures will more detail will study all those things. Those statistical studies will help us to generalize the result. When you get a certain experiment, certain result, you can generalize that by doing a statistical inferential statistical test. So maybe in coming lectures we'll learn more about that. about data analysis, about the statistical part. The characteristic of a experiment is objective is test a hypothesis or explain some phenomena. Usually your unit, data you take large, but variables are small. Most cases you have only two variables. Okay. So you go a little fast. Then comes the finally the experiment design. Formulate your main research question and sub questions, and then comes the experimental. Experiment design. In this case, you have to formulate your research question, if any sub question, and it should be very clear and focused. Or you either you do a research question or hypothesis. So many times you don't have a hypothesis, but you have a research question to answer. After once you have done this, you decided precisely your research question and hypothesis, then you have to do a experimental preparation. While doing experimental preparation, various aspects you have to keep in mind. You must aware of the research ethics and misconduct, like data fabrication, because you are doing an experiment and you are going to add new knowledge. So you have to be very careful about and aware of this, that data fabrication, image manipulation, plagiarism, data falsification, and also when you work in a laboratory, your safety procedure you must know well. And it is always good laying out the research question. What is your research question, your hypothesis, method of analysis, plan in a writing before collecting any data. You write down everything. Your research, this is my research question, this is a method I'm using. In fact, when you do an experiment in a accelerator, when the experiment will be on, you have to there will be a blackboard here. There you write everything. What is your research question and which method you are using. So it's always you should keep writing that. This is a very good practice. Then in the meantime, you have also done your literature review, and you have to operationalization you have to do. Like you must define your variables before doing experiment. This is what is called non-bialization. Define variables. So which are the variables you are going to measure, and what are you are going to change? What is your independent variable? What is your dependent variable? So how can you measure variables? You have to maybe do some sort of a brainstorming among your group, and then you set some criteria. Okay, we will measure these things. Then you start your data collection with with certain criteria, like in your mind that you know your variables and sub variables, and you know that you are going to do the analysis of variance. Keep in mind. Then you have to do correlation, cause and effect. You have to study, and if required, you have to do regression. And hypothesis suppose predicts a correlation, then you must also test that after collection of your data. And always, this is another important aspect. Measurement uh, protocols, because this you have to follow some standard methods based on community recognized protocol. You cannot do in your own way, the thing that other people may not like. Suppose you are measuring certain property of a material. Suppose you are using a squid machine, then you must have to write that which machine you have used and things like that. Otherwise your data will not be believed. And before starting experiment, you must prepare your equipments, and you must know the measurement techniques you are going to use. And if something for your experiment is required to be made in a workshop or somewhere, that also you have to do. You should also train yourself for operating the machine, and also calibrating the machine. And another important aspect is you must prepare a lab notebook. When you are doing experiment, you must have a lab notebook. Information on experimental parameters, raw data, help you to communicate collaborators. Suppose in your notebook, you write everything in detail about your experimental parameters and raw data, because later on when you have to communicate your experimental procedure and everything to your collaborators, that will help. And many times we forget in which condition we have done the experiment. So when in your lab report, you should write everything. When you put the machine on, you write on time, off time, and in between, if there is some problem, you should also write as comment that this thing happened, that happened. Those things are very important, because they will be useful later time. And then finally you run your experiment. Once your data collection is done, and you apply the whatever your experimental design time, how the experiment to be done, what are the things you have to measure, that has been decided. You just run your experiment with those criteria. Then comes the data analysis part. And usually, in an experiment research, you compare variables of an experimental parameter. You have few variables, you compare them. Then you do statistical analysis like variance, correlations, regression, cause and effect. You will find from there. You have to carry out, error analysis, and then finally you write the. Once everything is done, then you write the result. So that's all for today. I think we have 1 hour. So now you can ask me question. Yeah, you can take one class question. Yeah, today's class question you can write. Okay, let me write that. In the meantime, you people can ask me question. ठीक है ना? Philosophical stance. Okay, this is the class question. You can write this and send it to RM-8 ओके, ठीक है जाइए क्वेश्चन. Okay, okay, we'll Xerox and send. You can send a mail to me, so then I will do. No problem, that I can do. Oh. Any question? No question. If there is no question, then we will go offline. Okay, thank you everybody.